With spring practice just days away, what do the Knights need answers for in the weeks ahead under the new regime? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Charge On. As always, I'm your host, Sean Green. Before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with a large selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC. BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Hello, everybody. It's been a little bit, and by a little bit, I just mean about a week and a half. We took a little break, and I didn't anticipate taking a break. I think a lot of you, that's on me, didn't really let anybody know, and that's because I totally forgot I had a trip. It kind of came not out of nowhere. I was aware that I had a trip planned, but when we're doing the 2 pods a week, you just kind of forget. So I went to Colorado and did skiing and snowboarding. Snowboarding was what I did. Not really a vacation, more of a workout, but we went on a last Thursday, and totally it just slipped my mind that I had now recorded a podcast, and we didn't come back until Monday and had no time to get up an episode on Tuesday. So that kind of caused the little break in Charge On episodes, but we are back. Just me this week. Couldn't plan it right for Nick. That's on me. This was the only time I could do it, which is Thursday night at 7 o'clock. So for all of that stuff, we're back. And we're going to get to the defensive breakdowns on the position, the last couple positions when we have the time. But we're kind of starting to ramp up with spring practice starting next week. So I figured this would be a really good time to just kind of dive into sort of questions that we need answered heading into spring. We obviously talked to the coaches. I posted a video on that. And this is one of those springs, guys, where you really have no idea what you're going to get out of it. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns with this football team. And frankly, I think us in the media, us that do this, and even fans, there's a lot of question marks. I mean, if you look at, I think BetOnline has UCF's projected win total at 6.5. They're the worst, tied for the worst projected win total in the Big 12. So there's not a lot expected out of this UCF Knights team, and you can't blame people. I think I have UCF at 6 wins in my early prediction. I know Nick has them at 5. So it's one of those things where you really just don't know, especially this spring, what you're really going to get out of this team. And that's why I kind of went through and really thought about questions that I want answered come April, mid-April. Like, heading into fall, how confident are we in these areas that we can go into August, September and say, okay, this team is going to do X. We expect this out of this team and go from there. Because frankly, like I said, when we get media availability over the next couple weeks for spring ball, I'm sure we're not going to see a whole lot, especially with no spring game. Usually I say spring game is stupid, and listen, I know it's mainly for fans, and I like to see the players a couple months out just to get a feel, but you usually can never tell how good or not good a player is in a spring game. Now, you kind of could see it this past spring game with KJ Jefferson. KJ Jefferson looked really bad in this last spring game, and we're like, okay, it's just a spring game, and then look what happened. But I think in this sense, it really would be beneficial. Now, we're obviously not going to get that. There haven't been any news regarding open practices or, letting fans come watch practice or open scrimmages. There's been none of that. I'm assuming that will get announced here shortly within the next couple of weeks if they are doing that. But for media and media availability, I'm assuming it's going to be very limited. I'm assuming it's going to be a lot of just watching the players stretch, not really watching any plays. And that's to be expected. I mean, you have to understand from Scott Frost and staff's point of view, they have a lot to get to. They have a lot to teach. And I don't think the main priority right now in March is getting the media to see how some of these players look. I think the coaches need to see how these players look before the media. But there's 5 questions that I think generally need to be somewhat figured out or answered heading in to fall, because there is going to be a second portal window that is going to factor in. I think a lot of players are going to really figure out what their role is in the next month for this team and then make their decision on do they need to enter the portal. There are going to be some guys that you don't expect to leave UCF that you may think have a really good position on the team that enter the portal because either A, they're going to get a better offer somewhere else, or B, they don't feel like they're in a good position on this roster and they need to go find a better situation. So I wrote down 5 questions and I put some questions down below that you might want answered. Obviously, some of these are pretty obvious, but I would like to hear what you guys have to say on this. But the first question is the most obvious one. Who is taking the most snaps at quarterback 1? Who is looking like they are in a good position for QB1? I think it's a 2-man race. I think it's between Taven Jackson and Dylan Risk. I think those are by far, and we will talk about this race for the next 6 months. Like it's one of those things that is so obvious that we will not stop talking about it. But it is a valid question. Like, who in spring kind of takes that next leap, especially under Mackenzie Milton? This is Mackenzie Milton's first spring as quarterback coach. Who really develops in the next month or so for the however many practices? I think it's like 14 or something. Who really develops and takes the step ahead? I do foresee if Taven kind of is the leader in the clubhouse per se after spring, it would not shock me if Dylan entered the portal. I think a lot of UCF fans expect him to be QB1, and I think that kind of leaves Dylan in an interesting position. Like, do you want to come and be the backup? Do you want to stay and fight for that QB1 spot, even if you don't look like you're leading? I think the staff is high on Dylan Risk. I think they like what they saw on tape. I think there's a reason Dylan stayed. I think he thinks he has a good chance at QB1, and I think he does too. He's got to go out and perform. I think he showed some good things and bad things. But at the end of the day, there needs to be a clear cut. Some people might say you don't need to decide a quarterback in spring, but you kind of do. You kind of do. Because every time if you go in and you still don't know after spring, then you don't have a good enough quarterback that's blowing your socks off where you're like, okay, that's a clear-cut guy. That's your clear-cut guy. If Dylan Risk goes in spring and blows the staff away and is by far and away the best quarterback on the roster, then you know you have your quarterback. Same thing with Taven. If Taven goes in and he's by far and away the best quarterback, then you got your guy. But you have to know you have a guy. You have to have one guy taking by far and away the most snaps and is by far and away the best quarterback on the roster come April. Because if you get into August and you're still figuring that out, I think that's going to be a rough thing to sell UCF fans, but specifically your team, that we still don't have a quarterback picked and we still don't know who the guy is, or you're being wishy-washy. I think at the end of the day, you got to pick one and make it very well known after spring. They don't need to make it well known to the fans. Like, I don't expect Scott Frost to come out at the end of April or mid-April and say, okay, we have our starter. I just expect it to be kind of known around the team who the guy most likely is. Second question, which again is a lot of these are very well known and obvious to UCF fans, is which receivers step up and take lead heading into the fall? I talked to Sean Beckton and seemed like there was a kind of clear answer on that, where he kind of mentioned that the senior leadership, specifically from the portal, and what they added from the portal is going to be huge for them and helping the young guys. I will say, I think there is a lot of thought processes of, hey, let's play the older guys and let's do that and give them a year to kind of show the young guys the ropes. I don't think it's necessarily the right move. I think you bring those seniors in to mentor. And if they're the better players, you play them. But I think UCF has a lot of talented young receivers on this roster that I think are have higher ceilings than some of the guys. I think a DJ Black could really help. He's a senior. I think he's probably one of the more talented players on the roster. But again, he's got to prove himself. He's coming from a D2 college. But I think if you look at just production-wise, I think DJ Black should be a starter. Besides that, there's a lot of unknowns. You don't have a Kobe Hudson walking in the door, but you might have a Kobe Hudson or a Javon Baker that's young and just needs playing time. So I think the wrong move would be to put the 3 seniors as your starting guys from day one, and those are your starting guys on the first day of fall camp as well. I think this is the time to really have a clear-cut competition and see who steps up. There was a maturity question, said by Sean Beckton, where he didn't feel like the maturity was up to the standard that it needed to be for the young receivers. And that's usual for some of these young receivers that come into college, for them to be mature and realize that they need a little bit of help to get to where they need to be. I know a lot of these guys come in and think they are just the guys. Not everybody is a Ryan Williams. But from the guys that UCF has recruited over the past couple of years, I think UCF has some really good top-end receiver talent. And I think you got to give them a hard look. And I'm sure, and like I've talked about, UCF will give them a hard look. So it's going to be up to them. It's going to be up to them to take the lead and to show the coaching staff why they need to play. Because at the end of the day, it's a win-lose business. It's not about, maturity. We see that in the NFL all the time. If a guy thinks he's the best and he shows he's the best, he's going to play. And I think UCF has a lot of guys that can play and should play. Number 3, how dominant will the defensive line be? Again, this is something that I don't know if we'll figure out necessarily, but it's a position group led by Kenny Martin, specifically the defensive tackles, that I think is going to be crucial in determining how good this defense can be. Now, my 4th question when I get to it is also, basically the next 3 are referencing the defense. Because I think with the offense, there are so many unknowns that you can't really determine. Scott Frost, the offense he's going to call, what he's going to run. But you don't know the quarterback, you don't know the receivers. You really only know the running backs. So there's a lot of unknowns there. There's a lot of unknowns with the defense, but you have a greater picture maybe of how many guys you have and how they're going to be used. I think the defensive line, you look and everything you hear is that the defensive line is going to be really, really good. You have Mike Dawson, obviously coaching the edge guys, and everything we hear, getting John Walker back, getting the edge guys back. We talked about having Isaiah Nixon step up, having a lot of those guys return. And then again, just getting the young guys to really take that next step. I think losing Ricky Barber, losing Lee Hunter is big, but I have a lot of confidence that the defensive line has enough returning guys on the edge and getting John Walker back in the middle and Kenny Martin coaching those guys up to believe that defensive line can really dominate and be a factor for UCF. Now, especially the way that Alex Grinch wants to run defense, the defensive line is going to be crucial in being able to get pressure on the quarterback. So this is a very big spring in really seeing what works for this defense in this defensive line. Is John Walker who we think he is? Had an amazing freshman year, obviously got hurt, didn't play really barely at all last year, so only in practice. So that's going to be the real story. Is this defensive line legit? Are they going to be able to create pressure, which they did not do a lot last year? But I have full faith in them. But it's going to be a question that needs to be answered. Are these guys legit? But I think when you look at the roster and you look at the talent coming out of high school and previous talent, it's the most stacked out of any position group on the roster, the defensive line as a whole. So that is a huge question, and I'm excited to see how that kind of plays out. 4th question I have. Do the Knights have a secondary that can keep up? Now, I know everybody's going to be like, Sean, Chasen Johnson's coming back. And Chasen Johnson is going to be the clear-cut day one starter, which very well may be true. I think Jason Johnson showed a lot. He impressed me a ton as a true freshman in the way that he handled himself. Could he have been better in a lot of situations? Absolutely. But there's a reason that all of these schools were going after Jason Johnson, because he's a young corner that has a lot of starts in college football already and showed a lot of promise and a lot of good things. But there's a reason that UCF went out in the transfer portal and added a bunch of guys in the secondary. They think that the secondary is a position that they are going to need desperately. And they proved that. UCF secondary wasn't amazing last year. But what's crazy is they have 2 DBs in the NFL scouting combine. This right now. Mac McWilliams and BJ Adams. And both those guys most likely are going to get drafted. So it's one of those things where you look at it and you say UCF had 2 draftable cornerbacks and it looked that rough. But the thought process by Frost and staff, you need a bunch of bodies that can be able to come in and out. You want obviously 2 top corners. I think Jason Johnson can be one of those guys. But like I said, there's a reason the staff has added so many. Who steps up? How many are in good standing? How many do you think are dudes that can actually contribute? And how many of them are just going to be bench warmers that never see the field? I would say a good chunk of them probably never see the field for UCF. They've got a lot of young, up-and-coming safeties and DBs from the last couple rookie classes or freshman classes that I think are looking or should be taking that next step and playing some minutes here and snaps. But it's going to be up to them. And I think if you slot Jason Johnson number 1 and you tell me, Sean, who's that guy that's going to slot in across from him, I couldn't tell you right now. I couldn't tell you. Luckily, they brought in Brandon Harris, who I was really impressed with. Tim Harris Jr.'s brother. He's coaching the cornerbacks. He's been in Florida for a long time. And I think he's going to be able to really relate to a lot of these guys and do a good job coaching them up. Now, like I said before, I liked UCF's previous coaches at that position. Trovon Reed, I think, is a huge loss for UCF, especially in recruiting. Addison Williams was a great recruiter as well. Now, maybe the development wasn't there. I think that's something that you can literally look at and hype on and say, these coaches didn't really develop the players as well as you would like. Right? And I think that's where you hope that Brandon Harris can really come in, develop, and get the best guys out on the field. If the Knights have the same secondary as they do last year, we're in for a rough season. That's just the fact. UCF really couldn't stop any passing attack that they went up against. Their run defense was a lot better, which helped. But when they played a hardcore passing team, they couldn't stop them. Just go back and look at the TCU and Colorado games. You couldn't stop them. Anything. But with that being said, this year, it's different. You have a new defensive coordinator. We're going to get into that in a second. But that's going to be just like the defensive line being dominant. It's going to be, can the corners hold the receivers? And that's going to be a big thing. Like, we might go into fall thinking the secondary is great, but we then realize our receivers aren't as good as we anticipated, and then we get an actual matchup, and it unravels. So that's something we want to know in spring. Do we have a secondary that can keep up with some of the best teams in the Big 12 on offense? And that might not be a question that's answered in spring, but you have to know that we have at least 4 guys. You have 4 guys that you feel extremely confident can be your starting guys from day one. Then my final question, and one that I want all of your input on. I want all your input on all this, but this is the one that I think a lot of us have talked about a lot. Is Alex Grinch the right guy? This was genuinely the most important hire for Scott Frost, was Alex Grinch, or your defensive coordinator. You're going to hire a defensive coordinator. Is that guy the right guy? Did you make the right hire? And public perception tells you he didn't. But that's public perception, right? At the end of the day, it's going to be what product goes out on the field that proves that. Now, a lot of people look at it and say, oh, Steve Cooper, that was a bad hire for offensive coordinator. And we've continued to say offensive coordinator does not matter. It does not matter one bit in this argument at all, right? What does matter is the defensive coordinator. Scott Frost will not be calling the defense, right? It's going to be Alex Grinch. And Alex Grinch has proven time and time again that he has some really good defenses in certain games. But in a lot of the games over the last however many years that he's been DC, it's been rough. He's given up a lot of points. There needs to be some real work between the offense and the defense of UCF. Because if Scott Frost decides that one game they need to go really fast, well, this defense is going to need to be challenged, especially in the spring, on up-tempo offenses. Alex Grinch knows how to coach up a defense that also has a fast-tempo offense. He's obviously been in a lot of those situations, but he hasn't really shown recently that he is a top-end DC in the college football world. When you have college football fans near and wide laughing at you for making a certain hire, it begs the question, did you make the right one? When certain players are coming out that this coach formerly recruited, and they're giving basically horror stories on what a coach has said to them and stuff like that, it does make you question. Now, we got a chance to talk to Alex Grinch, and listen, I think he said all the right things, and you have to kind of go into it with an open mind, because at the end of the day, he's your DC, and you're paying him a good chunk of money to be your DC. But at the end of the day, if you come out of spring, and we're not going to see much, but if you come out of spring and the defense looks a little rough with how it's handled, then you can really give a big X to Scott Frost. 1X. I'm not saying it's do or die, but you could say, hey, this probably wasn't the right hire, and this could ultimately hurt you for this upcoming season. A season that you could have done decent, or not even decent, but serviceable, and then you hired the wrong guy at DC that nobody else would have hired in the Power 4 probably to be your defensive coordinator, except UCF. So those are my 5 things. What are your guys' 5 things? Drop them down in the comments below. Let us know what you think. This is a very important spring. This is really building the foundation, and it starts next week. We haven't heard anything on when spring practice is going to open up for us. I'm assuming it starts Monday, and I'm excited. I'm excited to talk to some of the players. We have a lot of new faces that we need to learn, and like I said literally 2 seconds ago, in terms of importance, this is probably the most important spring that Scott Frost is going to have, because it's building the foundation of this team and keeping the foundation as you move forward. Next year will be important because it's building on what you've built. But if you come in and have a dumpster fire in the spring, which I don't expect them to, but if you come in and it's not settled and you don't kind of set that culture and that foundation, it could get off to a rough start. But from everything we've heard and everything we've seen, it seems like the foundation, just in the weight room alone, has been done the right way, and players are already buying in. And I'm excited to talk to them and see kind of what they feel, especially the ones that were here over the last couple of years. I really want to get a sense of the different feeling that it's been, the difference in it without even practicing yet, what the difference has been between the Gus Malzahn era and the beginning of the Scott Frost era. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Charge On. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, do all that you do. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. We're going to still try to do 2 episodes a week. That is not going to change. We'll see on Tuesday, but for sure we'll get out at least 1 next week. And again, with the team breakdowns or the position breakdowns, those are now going to be if we need to drop an episode and we want to get you guys content, that'll be something that we do. We want to make sure we're getting all the news from fall camp or spring camp, excuse me. All the news out to you from spring camp in the coming weeks. So just a heads up on that. All right, this has been Charge on presented by Bet Online. We will see you next week.